Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Stephen Evans. I'm the Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all here today to this webinar to talk about the Great Skills Divide. And this is based on the first report of our new Ambition Skills programme. So I'll say more about that as we go along. And I'm really grateful to City and Guilds and to NOCN for supporting that Ambition Skills programme. Now, if you are on social media, then please do tweet away using the hashtag Ambition Skills that you can see on the slide on your screen. And also, please do put in any questions for our panelists for the discussion we're going to have later as we go along as well. You should see hopefully a Q&A box that you can put your questions into. So we'll see lots of questions there, lots of time to get through as many of those as possible later in the discussion. A bit around the logistics for this. So I'm going to kick us off and go through some of the key findings from that first Ambition Skills report. And we're then going to hear from two expert panelists. So we have Faiza Khan, who is the Executive Director of Corporate Affairs and Foundation at City and Guilds, and Charlotte Horobin, who is the Chief Exec of the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce. And I'm sure between the two of them, they will hopefully shed more light on these proceedings than we saw in the debate last night. And well done to any of you who didn't watch that. So that's how we're going to go along. As I say, please do put your Q&A in the question box there, and we'll get through as many of those questions from myself and Faiza and Charlotte as we get into that bit of the discussion. But to kick us off, I'm going to take us through some of the key findings from this first report. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So this is a little bit about what that Ambition Skills programme that I mentioned is. So what should we be aiming for in terms of learning and skills across the country, and how best can we achieve that? So the first report is about examining the current state of play, and then we get on to thinking about policy and what's working, what's not, what can we learn from elsewhere, what should we do more of, what should we stop? And then working up a blueprint for change for the new government, but also for devolved administrations across the UK, local government, and also for employers and practitioners as well. And as I said, we're really grateful to the support of City and Guilds and NOCN for this programme. So we move on to the next slide, please. So let's get into some of the findings from this first report, which we released last Monday, and lots of coverage in the FT and elsewhere. And to forewarn you, there's going to be a succession of slightly depressing charts now that go sharply in the wrong direction after sort of 2008, 2010 time. But we will get on to the what are we going to do about it bit, but I'm going to slightly depress some of you first. So hopefully you've got a cup of tea and a biscuit to hand. So firstly, where are we now? So what we've done is we've looked at the UK's qualification profile and compared it to other countries, so 39 OECD countries. And we've also projected forward where ourselves and all of those countries would end up in 2035 on current trends. And the summary is that we're running to standstill, so we're improving, but so is everybody else. And we're on track to be quite far behind lots of other countries, particularly when it comes to intermediate qualifications and essential skills like literacy, numeracy, and digital. So let's unpack that through a few, as I say, slightly depressing charts. So next slide, please. So where are we now? So this is the 2022 picture. And what you can see on the bottom there is the proportion of people in each country with low qualifications. So this is below GCSE level or equivalent in the UK. And on the left-hand side, that axis, the y-axis there, is the proportion of people qualified to higher education level in each country. So basically, you want to be in the bottom left-hand corner, having a low proportion of people with low qualifications sorry, you want to be in the top left-hand corner. Let's get that one right. We want to have a low proportion of people with low qualifications and lots of people with higher education qualifications. Of course, it's not just about the numbers of qualifications, who's getting them, how they're used at work, whether they're relevant skills. These things all matter as well. But this is looking at proportions of people with these qualifications. So you can see the UK there, not looking too bad in terms of higher education qualifications. This is for 25 to 64 year olds, and we're in that upper quartile there. So we are, despite all the debates about too many people are doing higher education, we are still behind countries like Japan and Canada and South Korea and Ireland, but upper quartile. But we really look like we're lagging behind lots of countries by having a higher proportion of people with low qualifications. So we're too far off to the right here when it comes to that. So that's kind of where we are now. We go on to the next slide. This takes trends over the last decade and projects them forward and sees how things change. So what you can see there is the UK is on track to have about 60% of 25 to 64-year-olds qualified to higher education level. Again, sort of just in the upper quartile of those 39 OECD countries, but not top of the pops there by any stretch of the imagination, but still really lagging behind when it comes to the proportion of people qualified below GCSE or equivalent level. So, you know, higher than the G7 average, the EU average, Germany, US, Japan, Canada, France. I'm not going to list all the countries, don't worry. So that's where our biggest shortfall lies, and on current trends will continue to lie. So just to summarize that on the next slide, of the 39 OECD countries, we're on track to be 12th for low qualifications. That's up 1 place from today. 29th for medium qualifications, that's GCSE or A-level effectively or equivalent. That's unchanged from today. And 10th for higher education qualification, down from 6th today. So in footballing parlance, this is mid-table mediocrity, particularly when it comes to those lower and medium qualifications. And we know this really matters for the economy, for people's opportunities, for employers' needs as well. So this is really having an impact on us. So why are we lagging behind in this way? This is the second and final phase of depressing charts before we get on to what we're going to do about it bit. So if we go on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I knew there was one more. There you go. So it's not just comparing ourselves to other countries where we're lagging behind, but we're lagging behind on the jobs that are being created. Okay, so this chart, if you look at the line in particular, this shows the change, expected change in the number of jobs requiring different qualifications by 2035. So you can see there's growth in the number of jobs requiring higher education and a shrinking number of jobs requiring GCSE or below GCSE level. So that stagnation that we're seeing in the supply of skills and qualifications is not meeting up with this rising tide of skills demand from employers over the next 10, 15 years, and the way our economy is changing. And this is part of the economic cost of not investing in skills and not improving skills and not matching those world leaders. So now let's move on to the next slide, which does start to talk about how we've ended up here. And this is a long story going back more than a century, but I'm just going to focus in particular on the last 10, 15 years. And basically, we've got falling investment by both employers and government, and therefore falling participation in learning and growing inequalities. So let's pick out a few of those facts. If we go on to the next slide, please. So the amount that employers spend training each employee is down 26% in real terms since 2005. And there's a real inequality in employer investment in training as well. So you're 3 times more likely to get training at work if you're a graduate than if you're a non-graduate. So this isn't just about public investment in training and skills and learning, and whether that's matching needs and whether it's what employers want, where it's work focused. This is also about what employers themselves spend, what they invest in, and how they utilize those skills at home, at work. This is a really massive challenge, and I think gets a bit under remarked upon in the policy debate. So hopefully we'll come back to that in the Q&A. Next slide, please, looks at what's happened to public investment. And again, you can see 20% cut in skills funding in England since 2010. That's £1 billion lower than it was. And we've got more people than we had in 2010 as well. So that funding is stretched across a larger number of people. So actually today we're spending about £1.73 a week per adult on adult skills. And you can't even get a flat white for that, certainly not in central London. And I would argue that skills are probably more important than flat whites, except possibly first thing in the morning. So we're kind of really underinvesting there across the board. And this has had an impact on the number of adults improving their skills, as the next slide shows. The number of adults improving their qualifications in England has basically halved since 2010. And this is part of what's holding us back. The skills of the population isn't just about initial education in schools and colleges. 80% of our 2035 workforce has already left compulsory education. So we have to help adults to improve their skills and qualifications if we want to catch up with other countries and to meet the rising tide of skills demand from employers. If we go on to the next slide, this starts to talk a little bit about what that all adds up to over the course of a decade. So compared to if adult attainment of qualifications had stayed at 2010 levels, there are 7 million fewer qualifications gained by adults over the course of that 14 years. That is a massive reduction, 7 million lost opportunities. And there's particular inequalities between who's missing out most. And that's the last couple of slides that I wanted to focus on. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So those falls in participation have been starkest in the most deprived areas. So about a 27% fall in learners in the most deprived areas, barely changed in the least deprived areas. So we're increasing inequalities here, reducing opportunities most for those who need them the most. To put that into numbers on the next slide, so about 125,000 fewer learners in the most deprived areas and something like a net 10,000 fewer learners in the least deprived areas. These are massive changes that are increasing inequality. This is not levelling up. If we move on to the next slide, please. So I recognise that was a series of depressing charts going sharply in the wrong direction, but I think it's important that we be honest about where we are, and you can't, there's no good pretending those charts don't exist or saying everything's fine, and you need to understand where you are to know where you want to get to next. As I say, what we want to get onto next, and part of the discussion today, is how do we get there? How do we improve things? How do we change things? Not just about money, money matters, but it's also how do we engage people in learning? How do we get employers investing more themselves? How do we join up policy? How do we plan for the long term rather than having a series of short-term initiatives? So as I say, we're really on the lookout for ideas and examples and questions or things you think we should look at as well. So let us know through the Q&A. Let us know afterwards as well. Do get in touch. But for now, I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that gives you a sense of what we found thus far and helps to frame some of the debates. I'm really interested in the discussion about what we do next with it and how we change the shape of those charts. I'd love to do a webinar in a year or two's time where the lines are going up. So thank you all. And we're going to now have some input from our two panelists who I introduced earlier, but do keep putting the Q&As, the Qs rather, and then we'll get onto some As through the discussion because we want to hear what you think as well. So we'll start with Faiza. Faiza, thank you for joining us. And as I say, thank you for City and Guilds support for this programme. And over to you.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing such brilliant work at a really timely moment in our political cycle. I think it speaks very loudly about the underinvestment in the last 10 years and what that's leading us into up to 2035. And in particular, the inequity that we're seeing growing. We all know that COVID had an impact. We all know that there are wider socioeconomic factors at play. But actually what's happening is, when I read the report, I look at the rhetoric of a commitment to lifelong learning. Some of the policy changes, such as the lifelong learning entitlement and things that have been really positive, but how much they're dwarfed by that underinvestment in skills. And I think that's what's coming out loudly and clearly for me. Really stark fact to know and see the 80% that have left education, together with actually how few us we've seen that 50% adult participation rate quite stagnant for a while now. And if I look at youth unemployment rates that we're seeing go back up to what we were at a decade, it all points to rhetoric not matching reality, commitment not matching action. And one of the things we called for when we set up the Future Skills Coalition, which was mentioned in the report, was that national strategy for local inclusive growth. We talked about fair and accessible funding. We were really conscious not to say, look, we want to find loads and loads of pots of gold, but actually we want the system to work better for learners and to be modern. I mean, if you look at the other OECD countries, it'd be really interesting to kind of delve deeper and understand kind of what does learning feel like as an experience for the learner, because it has to be more diverse, it has to be more stackable, it has to be more hybrid, it has to be learner-led. And I think when you look at the report, whilst it's depressing, what's really encouraging is that skills has been a very big part of the current discourse leading up to the election. I think it continues to be an election topic in a way that I don't think it has been in the past. I think that's not divorced from the economic climate we're seeing and the skills shortages, and people are starting to understand actually this is having an impact. But the great opportunity here is the timeliness of the report. And so I really commend you for what you've produced, because as you say, the slides exist. They are very clear what it says in terms of our place on the world stage. And, you know, City Guilds are only too happy to support, not least our charitable objectives demand that we are champions for skills. So I think that's what this report is doing. It's presenting skills as an investment route, not as a spend. And I think that's the mindset that I would advocate. I can see some of the questions in the chat, didn't get to see all of them, but people were talking about how do we get more from disadvantaged communities in? And I can only share just some of we have so many great examples at City Guilds and the people we work with and centres and partners. And in particular, I also head up the foundation work, where we're doing really bespoke work with the most disadvantaged at-risk groups who are very far from the labour market. And then again and again, we see that promise of a job at the end of a course paying back quite large sums in terms of rates of for those that have experienced a criminal justice system not going back and reoffending, for young people who maybe didn't have a career finding one through work. And I just want to finish with one stat. I know I've only got a few minutes for contribution, and I could say a lot about this because I'm just so pleased with the report. Is that just in we produce something called the Impact Report. I always have a copy with me, and it's not me kind of showing off, but I just want to, in case you want to find it on the internet, it's the Impact Report 2023 from City and Guilds. And it shows of the 22-23 of the 2019-20 cohort that happened just before COVID, 72% of them stayed in jobs when you look at last year, 22-23. That value of City and Guilds courses back to the economy was something like £11.2 billion, believe it or not, right? So if you look at that and you look at, then I'm for contextual reasons, I'm saying that those people that are gaining courses, gaining learning, gaining qualification are giving back to themselves and to the economy. So this is how I think the report sets up the conversation around what are we then doing if we have 27% most deprived communities not accessing opportunity? Where does that lead us? And I think that's the question.
Fabulous, thank you. Yes, and I can see lots of questions, as you said, coming through in the Q&A. So please do keep them coming. We're going to come back to as many of those as we can. And I think some important points there about how we place learning and skills in the context of growth plans and joining up with other areas. You know, if we want to build a load of houses, which most political parties say they want to, someone's got to actually build the things. For example, if we want a railway, which some people do in some places, then, you know, someone's got to build a railway. So joining those things up was really critical. And then, as you say, how we get people through the door who are most likely to miss out most at the moment, that's really important as well. Sometimes there's if we build it, they will come sort of thing, and then we're surprised when they don't. So lots to pick up on there. But what I'll do first is come across to Charlotte and ask you to say a few words, and then we'll broaden it out thereafter. Charlotte, over to you.
No, thank you, Stephen. And can I just reiterate my thanks to you and your team for the invitation to contribute. I agree with Faiza, a well-timed report and an important time generally as we move into a critical general election. I thought it was worthwhile just giving 30 seconds or so of a bit of a personal background. So I've been in post at the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce as CEO now for 10 months, but prior to that, I spent just over a decade supporting UK manufacturers, predominantly in the Midlands and the East of England. And I recall at the very start of that point in my career, skills dominated the conversation. And I've just joined you today from a walk around a racecourse with 25 employers where, guess what, skills was still the thing that we were talking about. So I've made it my mission not to throw stones in glass houses, and rather to try and understand and support and be part of the system more. So I've benefited from being a trustee for 2 university technical colleges. Those are sort of specialist STEM schools that were in Solihull and Coventry. I've enjoyed my time as an enterprise advisor working with the Careers and Enterprise Company, and as an industrial fellow working with Aston University. But my former employer was also a training provider in its own right. So I hope that just gives a few badges on the shoulder to say I've seen a few things. But naturally, the most powerful thing that I get to do is to speak to many employers and to understand their challenges. Now, as a chamber, we are one of 38 employer representative bodies leading on the local skills improvement plans, a relatively new concept launched by government over the last 18 months to 2 years. And that's really important because I think if you look at a place like Cambridgeshire, we're a prime example of where locality and that focus on microplace is really important. Of course, we're very proud to dominate the world in our science technology superpowers, but also we do have parts of our county, such as Fenland, which at the point that we developed the local skills improvement plan, sat 3rd out of 317 local authorities for a lack of investment in education and skills. If I turn to a city like Peterborough, amazing city with great attributes, but we also see the city fall into the bottom 10 for claimant counts, child poverty, and no qualifications. And whilst qualifications are probably not everything, there's definitely that kind of very close correlation, isn't there, between qualifications and prosperity and economic success and a fair economy. So for us, I think that point about qualifications are not everything. Those softer skills definitely do come out through local skills improvement plans across the country. And I'd probably point to digital and IT as a really good example, whereby when we ask employers to rank what's important to them, actually having your bachelor's in computer science actually fares pretty low. The things that they're desperate for are problem solvers, people with communication skills. But actually we know that it's not one or the other. It's about having the right qualifications for the market, but we also have to make sure that people have got those softer skills, that resilience, and COVID has definitely left us with quite a backdrop. We've had COVID, Brexit, a blockage in the Suez Canal. We've got some very serious geopolitical issues all around the world. And if I just think about my own career, a Scottish referendum, an EU referendum, many general elections, many changes of key people in influential positions, there's no wonder why businesses right now feel like they're in a holding pattern. And what we do need to do is instill confidence that people can invest, but also take that long-term vision so that we give that confidence for people into the future. We probably need to reduce perhaps initiative overload, and let's think about, okay, what's working well here and in other parts of the world, and let's steal with pride and recognise our employers desperately do want to invest, but right now we're facing economic challenges that are really still very heavy on employers' shoulders. So let's have more carrots and less sticks. Lifelong learning, very, very important point. We've got to make sure, though, that it's economically viable for those people mid-career to be able to retrain both for employee and employer. But to Stephen, to your very astute point, let's talk about new housing developments, new sites for employment, and how then education and transport come together to make sure that we galvanise very successful places for the future.
Fabulous. Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, lots for us to pick up in there, and lots within the Q&A as well. So perhaps if I start off, there is a question in the Q&A about if money's tight for the government, then how do we get employers to spend a bit more on skills and adult learning as well, more generally. We'll come back maybe to the public investment point in a minute, but I did show a chart earlier that showed that employer investment in training is down 26% per employee since 2005. Now, I think some of that is the general dire state of the economy, which has barely grown since 2008, and also about, Charlotte, as you were saying there, there's been about 5 once-in-a-lifetime events in about 10 years. So all of that economic stagnation, lots of things going on, lots of political and policy instability is not conducive to investment of any type by employers. So we do need to sort out the macro economy, which is one of those things that's easy for me to say. But in terms of then how we engage employers in investing more themselves in skills, is that something that is coming up in those discussions that you're having with employers? Is it something you've picked up through development of the local skills improvement plan? What sort of things, Charlotte, let's start with you, do you think might work?
I think right now we've got to, there's the sticking plaster effect of, we are still recovering from COVID. We've desperately got a shortage of people with the right skills in the right places. So that drives employers to do kind of reactive and less strategic things. So short, sharp, quick interventions, and perhaps not investing maybe in, say, graduates or maybe things like apprenticeships. But we do know you do need to do both things at once. So it's a bit like any economic downturn. The tempting thing to do is to stop things like marketing. And actually, that's the time you absolutely have to plough your funding into marketing. So we've got to recognise right now that we've got to support those today needs from employers, but also find economically viable ways to make sure that we are still, for the medium and the long term, providing sustainable ways to train people for those future roles.
Thanks, Charlotte. And Faiza, City and Guilds does a lot of work with employers. How do we get employers to invest more? How do we engage employers? What do we need to do?
So I think I'm going to give an example that we have in the Princess Royal Training Awards. So Princess Royal Training Awards is available to employers to apply to demonstrate their excellence in training and development. And we've got around probably just shy of 400 alumni that have received the award in the last 9 years since it's been running, sponsored by President Princess Anne. What's interesting about that award, look, you can't pay for it. You kind of have to go through a process and demonstrate your worth, meet the hallmarks of excellence. However, those that do have come out of it with around 67-69% saying we're going to go back and reinvest in training and development, and we wouldn't have done that until we'd actually gone through this process of understanding why it's important for so many things in terms of business development and running a good workforce and all the other things that training and development pays back. Actually, what we're finding is that the employers that are being really creative and going through that process of self-assuring and quality checking that their training and development meets their business needs are having more and more success out there in the commercial market. So I think there's something about, what do you do training and development for? While the PRTAs is one example of a programme that's developing excellence and accrediting it from City and Guilds, there is a moment, I think, for employers to set up, look at the future, go, what am I putting in now to invest into the future business development needs that I've got? And that feels like the conversation we should be having, specifically when we're seeing such a decrease, as you say, of employers perhaps shortchanging themselves by not investing in training and development and still having all those skills gaps. I think there's another thing around how local communities and industries work together, general industry and technical industry, to recognise the collateral that's out there in the market, the talent that's out there in the market, and maybe leading together in terms of actually, if they see a deficit, what can be done to develop the skills that are needed by that general or technical industry so that the pipeline of talent is there. And that's something City and Guilds increasingly talks to a number of industries about in terms of the offers that we make available. So I guess back to the point that there isn't one agency that can fix this in a locality, going hyper-local to Charlotte's point. Actually, what you really need is everyone to play their part. And in doing so, recognising that they're part of building a pipeline of talent. But back to the motivation point for employers, we've really seen people that have come in and tested themselves and then gone back and said, actually, I can release more budget back into training and development. I can see an outcome coming. So I think there's a bit of that, as you say, carrot and why do this, and then actually being really logical and methodical about what's around you and the assets around you that you can take in and develop a pipeline that you need for your industry or your community.
Fabulous, thank you. I think those case study examples through things like the awards that you mentioned, it can be really quite powerful as well in engaging. Just give me a chance to shamelessly plug our awards as well, which also includes one picked by Princess Anne. I think we're keeping her busy between the two of us. So there's some really good employer case studies in there. Next awards take place on the 2nd of July. So watch this space for another great employer example that we could all highlight along with the ones from the Princess Royal Training Awards and elsewhere as well. There's a lot of questions about public investment in skills. I wanted to start with the employer one because I think it does get a bit overlooked sometimes, but let's talk about the public side of things as well. So let's start with the sort of top level and then look at some topics underneath. So how do we get more investment in learning and skills let's focus perhaps on England to begin with, in a context of, tough economics, tough public finances. This is one of those ones where I think the economic case is quite clear that learning and skills boost growth. We did a report a few years ago showing a potential £20 billion boost to the economy from improving skills back to 2010 levels. Also, as we were saying during the discussion there, this saves money for other public services because learning and skills improve health, they reduce reoffending. It's a bit sort of cutting skills is a bit penny wise, pound foolish. But despite that, we're £1 billion short in England. And as a former Treasury official, I confess, there's a queue of people saying my thing's very important and will boost the economy and save lots of money elsewhere. So given all of that, how do we actually make the case for more money full stop to go into learning and skills and win the argument, given we obviously haven't quite got there today? Everyone says it's very important and then cuts the budget. So I don't know which of you would like to sort of kick us off perhaps on that one with any thoughts or handy solutions.
I'm happy to kick off, and I'm not sure, Stephen, if I totally answer your question, but one of the things I'd point towards is we've currently seen billions go back into the Treasury from the apprenticeship levy. Let's make sure that we use that existing funding and think about how we fine tune and tinker the levy programme to deliver for employers, to make sure that it works for local places, but also make sure that our educators as well have got the facilities and the ancillary support and services that they need. I've often seen where we've got employers with great appetite to train, we've got training providers ready, but actually things like making sure that you've got tutors available is often a really difficult thing. We've got a fantastic example in Finland where a local manufacturer has come together with the Combine Authority and a training provider. They've built a world-class new training facility, which we were at on Monday. The problem, though, is we can't get people there because it's rural and transport therefore becomes economically unviable. So it's that whole system thinking. But for me, I'd be pointing to the levy to say, rather than chucking more money in right now, can we at least make sure the funds we've got start to work and then think about what we do next?
Great, thank you. Yes, and the L&W team has corrected me. The Festival of Learning Awards that I mentioned are on the 3rd of July, not the 2nd of July. So don't look out for them on the 2nd, and I promise I'll be there on the right day. Anyway, that correction completed. Over to you, Faiza.
I agree entirely in terms of that unspent funding being available for the purpose that it was intended and not being kind of taken back into Treasury, never to be seen again, especially when we're seeing the participation rates in adult learning that we're seeing. I think we have to be quite targeted in terms of where we invest. We know that entry-level apprenticeships are not seeing the kind of numbers coming through as we might want. And whilst it's really great to see that the higher level courses are gaining investment from employers, so where employers are investing, we're seeing that it's at that 3, 4 and above. what it says is, what does that again mean for the inequity divide that we see at the lower end and the entry routes, and who does that impact? And it is impacting the under-19s. It is impacting Black and minority ethnic groups, less of whom are completing their apprenticeships. And then if you play that through into wages and earnings for groups that are young or single mothers or are from an ethnic minority or experience a disadvantaged group, you're seeing a real correlation in economic individual prosperity. And then I think that is the kind of conversation we need to have. How do we target investment in the right places? Use the investment, as Charlotte was saying, that is intended for its purpose, and then really try and upskill and support those people who could otherwise be part of a much bigger divide. We absolutely are seeing a divide that was there already in society pre-COVID, but has got worse. And I think I just go back to that point about rhetoric and reality. If we are really clear that lifelong learning matters, and we know more people are changing jobs, they're living longer, that we have to get this right at every level of transition for people. And I think the only way we can do that is targeted investment and also learner-led learning models, taking into account the rural divides, the digital deficit, all of that stuff. And also some of the transformation agenda we're seeing in terms of how people expect to receive learning. So I think it has to be targeted investment. I go back to the local model. I think we've got a lot to do with social, small and medium enterprises as well, to bring them on board. I think they're a big part of our economic community, but sometimes the red tape and the bureaucracy of how things like apprenticeships work can really freeze them out. They don't always know how they can make it work. So I think there's a big task for us to do there. But this is solvable stuff if it's got the right priority. So I'd say to any new government, these are things where we're not necessarily saying as City and Guilds or the wider skills community is not, it's not unrealistic about the funding that's available, but it is very realistic about the lack of coordination that is there in the system and in local communities, and how the two are not joining up.
Great, thank you. We've to sort of flow on from that a little bit. There's a number of questions in here which are about particular priorities for either current investment or new investment. So I want to pick up a little bit with both of you about where you would prioritize any extra investments that there may or may not be under a new government. So there's a couple of points here about the tutors and the adult learning profession. So there's somebody here quoting, so Timothy's quoting actually a lower pay for a main grade lecturer now than back in 2005, and a load more stuff to do. And that's related, of course, at least in part to, until recently at least, the funding rates per learner for many adults being frozen for about 10 years or so. And I don't know if you try, if any of you tried to go and pay the prices from 10 years ago in the shops, but you're going to get kicked out. So, inflation has gone up and we need to accept that. So something about terms and conditions and pay for adult education staff and how that might help. Then there's also a question, this is a little bit what we were getting at there about levels of learning. So one of the things that particularly annoyed me when I was putting this report together, the drafting gets tetchier as it goes on to try and hook you in to read it, is, let me give you just a comparison stat. So the number of adults improving their English and maths has fallen 63% in the last decade. Meanwhile, skills boot camps, which are one of the government's big things, 65% of participants already have a degree. So we seem to be prioritising people who've already got skills and qualifications to the detriment of those who haven't. And at the risk of asking a leading question, is that the right set of priorities? And then there's, I mentioned the adult skills budget is down 20% since 2010. Actually, the adult education budget is halved, and there's been an increase in apprenticeship funding, and that's where those two things balance off. So there is a balance between adult education and other forms versus apprenticeships. So I'm aware there's a lot in that question, but I think to sort of try and edit it down a little bit, if we did have some extra money, or we were making the case for some extra money, given all of that, what would be your respective priorities for spending it? Hopefully that made broad sense. That was a very wide-ranging question. Who would like to go first?
I don't mind having a go,
Yeah.
Charlotte, first. I mean, there is a lot there. I think I think we have to be really conscious that we're in an environment where we have to work with employers and industry and understand the needs that are going to come up in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think I'm in the territory of there is not going to be one answer to that. Of course, there's not. But how do we set up a system where we're having training and skills providers working alongside employers, understanding local economic need in any context in this country, but also more in other contexts around the world, and then designing skill solutions that meet what we think the workforce is going to need. And that is the kind of situation I think that would be wonderful if we could get into that kind of coordinated activity, working with colleges, working with universities, working with centres, working with short-term course providers to go, actually, how can we coordinate it for the learner? Because the learner, I think, gets quite lost in all of this. And that's why I keep going on about learner-led. There is an even bigger hill to climb with some of those groups that are experiencing disadvantage to even get them to understand what on earth is on offer. And then it's so uncoordinated. So I think for me, there's an investment in coordinating what's there already, but in tandem with really being quite future focused and being brave and innovative about what the next phase of skills solutions could look like for our learners. City Guilds works with, I think, something like 3.5 million learners a year around the globe. And there's billions of learners out there that should be benefiting from education and skills. How can we, and when you have that, it's about being very targeted with your investment in every locality with the employers and the industry, so that actually there's a job at the end of the training too. So that's the other thing for me, that we have to be really, really coordinated in our efforts to skill people up so that they have success at the end, and that you're getting those skill shortages right down, and then you get an industry and individual prosperity going up.
Thank you. Charlotte, over to you.
I'd agree that need to map live market demand and therefore deploy resource into the right type of training with qualifications where appropriate, and then make sure that our educators are also engaged, that they're able to advise learners as to what their investment in a particular qualification and course could lead on to. I think it's important that we don't forget the enabling support and services, and this is where things become complicated because it will sit across numerous government departments. But as I said before, actually childcare, access to care generally, adult care and transport are also things that hold great investments into training provision back, because if people have got family members to care for, or they can't place their children in a nursery to go and learn, then that is a challenge. We must make sure that we invest in, I think we've got a bit of a tsunami coming. We're already starting to see the pressures on tutors and trying to find those educators, but we had a HR and recruitment forum yesterday, and actually the burning challenge around teachers leaving our education system, what that is then doing for students who are not developing in the ways that we would have expected probably pre-pandemic. That is going to be a problem that is going to be just around the corner. If I was thinking more laterally, and to Faiza's point about being innovative, I'd probably say start with some leadership training. It's a really difficult thing to measure, but if you look at other countries like Germany and the US, they've typically been very good at training leaders. And everything for me then starts at the top, because that's about digital skills, green skills, how you then manage organisations in the best way. And actually on the flip side, then school engagement. Unless we start engaging at the very young ages and showing children from all backgrounds what opportunities are there, I personally don't think we will break down some of the barriers and inequalities that exist. But we've got to show people routes and provide a network, even if they perhaps don't inherit one through their own family and their own community.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree about the leadership and management stuff, by the way, and that's one of the shortfalls in this country compared to others that holds back productivity, with the noble exception of all the organisations represented on this webinar, undoubtedly. But and we did have Help to Grow, actually, didn't we, which was meant to do some of that. I don't know whatever became of that, which may tell its own story, but I completely agree that's absolutely critical. Another really critical thing that's come in via the Q&A is about careers advice and career support, which in fact he described in the question as the oil that lubricates the skills system and helping people make the right choices, because most people haven't heard of all of these levels that I was going on about earlier, or necessarily know how things might match across to some of the employer needs that you were talking about, Charlotte. So I think we have the National Career Service. One of the things the Labour Party said at the weekend was they want to integrate that with Job Centre Plus, and we await the proposals, of course, from the other political parties as well. But aside from, you know, shifting people around, what do we need to do to really make sure that people and also employers actually have the right advice, the right information, the right support to make those active choices? Maybe Charlotte, should we start with you on this one?
I think organisations like Chambers of Commerce, and there's many great trade bodies and specific networks across the country, play a part in this. Actually, how do we become that broker between local government, educators, and our local employers? And if I may say so, we work very hard and hopefully do a good pragmatic job. I think, again, it comes back to initiative overload. We do need to keep things simple, very simple marketing, so that employers, we almost hide the wiring of what we're trying to do behind the scenes, and we keep campaigns very simple. We've got to practice what we preach, though. We are a small employer in our own right, and we take on work experience students every quarter, if not more, if people want to come in and work within the chamber. But that's usually a product, because other organisations, through new working practices such as working from home or health and safety and insurance reasons, which I am always cautious sometimes crop up as a little bit of a, it's an elephant that we can point to. There are genuine circumstances where that is a challenge. I've worked with a local electrician business this week. They would be desperate to take on more work experience, but their clients are not content with them taking students on site. On the flip side, I've also worked with a foundry who every 6 months would benefit from at least 500 primary school children coming into their factory. So if they can do it, anybody can do it. But we've got to inspire employers. We've got to make it easier. But it is about people meeting in the middle. Nobody's, at fault here. Employers, we've got to inspire. We've got to say step forwards. But also we need to make sure that our educators also come forwards and, we meet in the middle and shake hands.
And Faiza, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to reinforce the point you made around education and starting with schools, actually, Charlotte, because it just struck me. I was thinking of a report Edge Foundation put out not so long ago where, a whole raft of schools they'd surveyed and students they'd spoken to had said, look, we just do not know what is available. We cannot work it out. We cannot understand how the system works. So what you've got is a situation where the employers are quite confused about what's available, what they can and can't do, what it really means to run maybe an apprenticeship or something like that. If you're kind of not got lots and lots of support around you, it can be very difficult, even though you might want to do it. And then just the work experience point, we know that's less and less available for people. I was talking to Hundo, who are doing some work around how you do more virtual experience support for people, because actually the world has changed, and some of the opportunities where people could go and find work experience, even if they weren't supported to have it, walking into a building now and going, actually, can I speak to a manager about something? It's not the same as it was pre-COVID, and the experience is very different as well when you're in the workplace. So I think we've got to take that on board into a situation where things were already quite complex. If you grow up in a multi-deprived area, you may not know that things like boot camps exist, apprenticeships exist, that there is other routes for learning when you leave school if you don't go down the the higher education path. And I think it is that coordination effort piece that we need to do for our learners, alongside employers, alongside local community providers of skills, and also charities. Charities are great in terms of getting to people and having that trust and that network and that agency and providing wraparound support. And we need to value the third sector for the role that it can play in that education exercise to help try and knit some of this together. For me, I think that's actually one of our biggest challenges, is that complexity that has been created over successive years of policy that has not been joined up. And it has meant that the learner is suffering. And so I think that's again, but brilliant, resolvable. That is resolvable. That's not something that is insurmountable for us as a nation and as a community that cares about the future of our workforce.
No, I completely agree with that. We've done pieces of work where we've mapped in local areas quite how many employment and skills initiatives there are aimed at people, and there's kind of often in a small area there might be 60, 70, which is and oftentimes people haven't heard of many of them. I also clicked through from the government's apprenticeship Twitter account aimed at employers that said, if you're interested in improving your skills, let us know. And it takes you through to a page with a list of initiatives with a short 2-sentence description of what, for example, a boot camp is, and there says, do you want some of these? And then if you click on that, then you eventually get through to download a spreadsheet with a list of all the boot camp providers in alphabetical order that you can then click through to their websites if you want to. And it's just, even as somebody who works on this stuff full time, I'd lost the will to live quite a bit there. So I think we need to simplify. I completely agree with that. And then also we can do a much better job as being a clearer front door. And I'm sure chambers of commerce around the country are helping local employers with that as well, because it affects employers and individuals. Definitely, completely agree. I also wanted to give a bit of a shout out to a couple of people who have mentioned Union Learning funds, which I think made a massive difference to a lot of people. And we certainly were one of the people who argued that their funding shouldn't be cut when it was a few years ago. And I know lots of trades unions carry on doing what they can in the sort of limited funding that they've got, and that feels like it's quite an important thing for the next years ahead as well. But I thought we might broaden it out. We've got a few minutes or so left, and there's a couple of questions in here, including from Ben about what we can learn from other countries. So you can never sort of just drag and drop what another country's doing in isolation, because it turns out it's very complicated and the country context matters as well. But there's also some examples in here from across different bits of the UK. So I think Jill, for example, has mentioned lifelong learning networks in Greater Manchester and elsewhere. So I guess from both of you, what would you say? I'm trying to end on an uplifting note here, as you can sense, after my depressing slides at the start. What would you say is working really well, or we can learn from another country, or this is a good example, we should do more of that? What would be the sorts of things that you would pick out? So maybe, Faiza, if we start with you, please.
Oh gosh, I don't have an example to mind, but what I do have is you helped me think about World Skills UK and organisations that are in the business of creating a platform where you can share practice. And I think, again, going back to just that, one of the earlier questions around how do you plan for the future, how do you plan skills for the future? We don't have to do it in isolation. Actually, we're a more connected world than we ever have been. And I think organisations like World Skills UK are really great at looking at examples from across the country. So I'd probably defer to look at some of that practice where people are doing this work to bring platforms together. And I know they've got a big event coming up at the end of the year. If people are interested to find out more, I think it is in Lyon, so you might want to find a way you can connect with them outside of that. But they are really great at bringing some existing practice together. I can't really conjure up an example specific in my head, and it's because there isn't one that I can think of that you can take and you can plop in. I mean, we work in 120 countries in City Guilds. Actually, believe it or not, some of those are very small one-man bands, and some of them are bigger teams. But the context is so important. The operating model is so important. The government's appetite for investment is so important. So it's very hard to come up with one that I think I could point to that feels relevant. But I think it's about that practice sharing and then celebrating the investment in skills. And some of the examples we talked about today, I think if we were louder and prouder about what skills can yield, we'd perhaps have a bit more openness to really get into it, and less of a conversation around bureaucracy, which is where I think we always end up. So yeah, I'd point to more celebration and learning about practice from around the world to help inform and guide us better.
Fabulous, thank you. And yes, I was really hoping for some glamorous international examples that I could try and blag a trip to. So Charlotte, any advance on Lyon?
Well, the best I could give you is a conference in Lyon. I'm sure they'd be delighted to have you.
I'll take that, but let's see what Charlotte's got.
I might have St. Neots or perhaps Malaysia at my sleeve, but watch this space. So using our last question and this question to bring them neatly together, things like bringing National Career Service together with Job Centre Plus that co-location piece of services, I think, is really important, and full empathy for the services that work incredibly hard. We're blessed with a brilliant region director for DWP in the East of England, a lady called Julia Nix, but I think we would all say that our job centres, could do with an evolution. We've got a brilliant example actually in St Neots. We've got a citizen hub, and it's breaking down the stereotypes of people that have perhaps felt some sort of stigma or certain feelings when going to the job centre. So lovely seating, privacy booths. The team there sit down and talk about skills, attributes, what people enjoy. Local employers use it as a hub to run events. So you've got this co-location of positive activity that genuinely is allowing people to come together to increase their skills, to improve themselves, but also to understand what local employment opportunities are there. So I'll be bold and say, we've got some great examples here in the UK. Let's use the local skills improvement plan logic, though, and not necessarily look at countries, but think about facets. Where have we got clusters, and where are those clusters elsewhere in the world that we can sort of borrow with pride? I'd probably nod to countries like Germany, though, where technical and academic qualifications, I personally have seen, are held kind of with parity. Many German managing directors that I've met from manufacturing firms have often done an apprenticeship and a degree, whether that's right or wrong. But my point is, let's drop our academic snobbery and recognise that many routes are relevant and deliver world-class careers. But we've got to make sure that we've got that industry experience. My high to conclude for you, Stephen, and to hopefully take you to Malaysia, would be when I was a trustee for the 2 UTCs over in the West Midlands, we entered Formula One in schools and we won the UK finals. The challenge then was finding the funding to take our team to Malaysia. And I'm absolutely proud to say that out of 26,000 schools globally, our team produced the fastest car. So that's hopefully a lily pad for you to go over to Malaysia. But to Faiza's point, it really does nod to the great work that, World Skills, Formula One in schools. There's lots of initiatives. Let's get behind those as opposed to creating problem or agenda item 4 to solve items 1, 2, and 3.
Fabulous, thank you. Yes, and very well done with that competition there. And I'm sorry that I turned this into basically trying to crowdsource some trips, which I now need to crowdsource some funding for to take me on that world tour. But they're all really good examples, and building on what we've got is really important. Completely agree with that. Sadly, we're now kind of up to time, so I'm going to have to draw us to a close. But I'm really grateful to both of our excellent panelists who are getting lots of virtual rounds of applause. I'm sure this is the thing with webinars, you can't do the real rounds of applause. But thank you both so much for so many important and insightful points there as well. A big thank you again to City and Guilds and to NOCN for supporting the Ambition Skills programme. A big thank you to Helen and the L&W team who you can't see on this webinar, who've helped to put all of this together and make it run smoothly as well. And also a massive thank you to everybody who's dialed in and taken part in such an active Q&A discussion as well. We didn't quite get to all of them, but I tried to cover as many different topics as I could. So thank you so much for that. Please do read the first Ambition Skills report. And as I say, this is an ongoing programme, so we really want to engage and think about how we set that higher ambition and how we deliver that higher ambition together. So you'll hear more from us, and please do get in touch directly. And in the meantime, thank you so much for dialing in. It's very much appreciated. Thank you all.